Welcome, everyone, to a very special Dispatch Live. We're thrilled to have you all here tonight to talk with David French about his new book, Divided We Fall. And joining David to ask him questions will be Sarah Isgur, one of our top writers and a legal eagle in her own right. David and Sarah, if you want to join us, uh, come on into the room. Welcome. I feel like we should have the Chicago Bulls entrance music. What's the Michael Jordan entrance music?
Who
um,
is the guy that would
we're
say, "Let's get ready to rumble"? We need,
That's right. That's
yeah. Instead,
um,
instead, it's podcast.
there were the Michael Jordan entrance music was played. Declan Garvey on our staff would know all this, but it became very popular to play for entries, big entries to weddings back. Now this is dating me. This is a long time ago. Anyway, after that brief digression, very excited to welcome you all to this special, very special Dispatch Live to talk about David's book and also to talk about the momentous developments just in the past few days as it relates to the Supreme Court and the 2020 presidential election and basically the future of the Republic. Um, I'll introduce, but neither one of these panelists need an introduction, but let me spend just a moment. Sarah Esker, you all know she hosts two of our podcasts. She writes very interesting and important newsletter called The Sweep, the last 100 days, looking in great detail at why things are happening behind the scenes. I'll tell you, I learn something every single time I read her pieces, every time I read her newsletters, and I look forward to getting them in draft form because I can read them before everybody else can. Um, and you know David French. David joined us from National Review Magazine. I have been an admirer of David French's for literally years. Was thrilled to have him join the Dispatch team. So excited to have him doing, at this point, three newsletters a week, two that are more or less on politics, policy, and culture, and then the very popular Sunday newsletter, which looks at religion, politics, policy, culture, sort of you name it. Um, I wanted to just take a second to introduce both of these panelists and spend just a moment on what it means to have David as part of our team. I've been a long time admirer of David. I've read his stuff forever. He's the kind of writer that when you agree with him, you're so happy to have somebody like David making the arguments on your behalf because he makes them far better than you ever will. And when you don't agree with him, you stop and think, where have I gone wrong? What is it that I'm not understanding about this particular issue? So I'm thrilled to have David on our team for that reason, and I'm in the middle of reading his book right now, and to describe the book as a powerful book probably doesn't do it justice. It is a must-read book. I don't use that phrase very often. It is a must-read book. If you haven't bought it, please go out and get it. Buy some for your friends. Encourage them to read it. Use it for your book club. It's a terrific, if somewhat discouraging and at times even a little encouraging book, a little bit both. But let me end this brief introduction with a story of something that happened to me just in the past couple of weeks. I was talking to somebody, a good friend out here in Maryland, about David, and this is someone who has basically become so sick of politics and so disenchanted with what's going on, so frustrated by the moment that he's decided more or less to tune out politics. He doesn't pay attention, doesn't watch the news, used to be a loyal Fox viewer, doesn't watch Fox anymore, really doesn't read newspapers, tries to keep up occasionally when he can, but it's not a focus of his day-to-day life. And I was talking to him the other day and he said, I read everything David writes. I'm particularly interested in his Sunday French presses because this friend is a man of faith, has been through some very difficult times, and says I learn something every time I read a piece or a newsletter from David. Always makes me think. I find myself thinking about it later in the day, a day later, a couple days later. But in particularly like the Sunday French press, because he's said he's so impressed with how David wrestles with these issues without becoming hostile or angry at the people he's describing, talking about, and often engaging. And this guy said something that just has stuck with me in the couple weeks since we've had our conversation. He said, I read David because I want to be enlightened, because I want to learn more. But I also read David because he makes me want to be a better man. And honestly, I can't think of a higher compliment to be paid to somebody who does what we do than that. So I wanted to leave you with that introduction, with that brief story about David, to let you know what other people are saying, to introduce Sarah, who's in a particularly unique position, not only as the co-host of Advisory Opinions with David, but as somebody who also went to law school at the same place. They'll probably bring it up 100 times and brag about how they went to Harvard. We like them anyway, despite the fact that they went to Harvard. But I'm very excited. I'm going to jump off here and jump into the chat. Very excited to listen to Sarah and David talk about David's terrific new book and about the momentous times that are upon us. So thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. Sarah, over to you.
David, I'm super pumped. It's kind of our first Advisory Opinions live, don't you think?
It is. It is. But I have to say that you need to keep it real with me after that Steve introduction.
Oh, yeah, no, for sure. Everything Steve said about you was like wildly, wrong, exaggerated. The book's
thank you. Okay,
mediocre
thank you.
at best.
All right, now we're back to normal. All right.
Yeah, okay, good. So David, I wanted very badly to like hold up the book, but Amazon has not, it is not, my physical copy has not arrived. But oh my God, you have it to hold up.
I do.
Beautiful. It's beautiful looking. Does it feel like you just like had another baby? Like you have another, like,
it is hard. And I'm sure there are people who are watching right now who've written books. We have a membership that's done a lot of really interesting things. And so I know we've got listeners or what people who've written their own book. And I think to a person, they'll say, it's really nerve-wracking when it's out in the world. It is this okay? Is this good? Because you pour so much of yourself into it, and then and it's a little slightly terrifying when it comes out.
So I think you know that I said this publicly, and I will, but I didn't say it to your face. You like when a friend of yours writes a book and like you've become one of my very, very close friends, in part because of quarantine. I don't have any other friends anymore, I guess. So like our time together on the pod, you're like my best friend now.
We're it.
Yeah, this is it. And so like I've known you were writing this book for a long time. We have not talked about it at all. And so as I started reading, I just assumed it was like every other sort of, pop political book. It's like, our times are so important and here's this thing. And I don't know, it's not what I read, right? I read like other stuff about fungus, for instance.
Exactly.
So was kind of dreading it because then I was going to have to tell you like, oh, David, it was so good. But I wasn't going to mean it. And then I got to page 119, David, and my mind was blown. And I realized that it was David French at his best because, and I am going to spoil it, like spoiler alert on the book, folks. I'm going to put the book into third. So the first third is laying out the case. And I think that's great. I think it's really well done. If you know David, you've seen some of this case before. But the second third is David bringing all of the pop culture takes that y'all hate, it turns out have been actually like amazing for David. It's creative and it's a fictional account, except at the beginning, David, I will tell you, I didn't know it was fictional. That's how real and good it was. And I was like, wait, I don't remember this happening, but maybe.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, no, he's writing fiction, nonfiction about the next, what do you think, 5 to 10 years of the history of the United States in 3 chapters. And I want you to talk about those in a second, and about sort of your thesis on the book. But really, I because it drew me in so much, I am going to want to talk about those 3 chapters a lot tonight.
Yeah, please.
But if there were an alternative title for the book, I think what I would have chosen, this is like a long title. Your political opponents don't just hate you. They want to rule you. They want to dominate you. And that was sort of what those 3 chapters were about. But instead of making it one sentence, which everyone's like, oh yeah, nodding along, like, no, when you're in it, when you're living it in this part of the book, I want you to turn it into a series. Honestly, like I'm phoning up Netflix like ASAP.
Well, I'm really glad to hear you say that, because that was the part of the book I was the most nervous about. I mean,
I think it should have been the whole book.
well,
If I have a complaint, it's that it should have been the whole book.
Well, it's funny because I literally went back and forth in my mind. Should I do fiction that's based in reality, that's near future fiction, but I'm not that requires a level of writing talent I just don't possess.
Clearly not true.
Well, bite-sized pieces, maybe I can pull it off, but I really was worried about that. But I also thought it was absolutely indispensable to the book, because if you can talk in sort of a dry academic way about all of these trends, and we can go into some of them, about how we're clustering off into like-minded communities, about how we're growing more extreme in our thoughts, about how we have less ability to communicate across the divide, and about how there are authoritarian threats to sort of classical liberalism. If you listen to me, you've heard me talk about that a lot. And then you can say, and that's a problem. And everyone's like, yeah, that's a problem. But then if you say, okay, wait a minute, let's think about how, if you're talking, think of it like building a bonfire, and you have all of this wood, and you have the fuel, you have, maybe you throw kerosene on it or whatever to make it ready to ignite. What does it look like if it ignites? And that's what the middle chapters are about. This is how it ignites, with all of the trends that are in that first third of the book. The middle third is how could this happen? And that's the part of the book that I think makes it or breaks it, quite honestly, because you either find it chilling or far-fetched.
It's not far-fetched. I wish it were. I mean, you have speeches in there. You have the whole thing, it's immersive. I meant to just
oral arguments.
Yeah. I mean, I was supposed to be doing something else, and I was like, I'm sorry, I can't do that anymore. I have to finish this section of the book because I couldn't put it down. It was the perfect dystopian novel for the 21st century. Just gonna say that. Yeah, that's a lot, but it's true.
Yeah.
What was that the hardest part to write, out of curiosity, or the easiest?
Easiest. Because I've been thinking about it for so long, so I have a kind of, I was one of these kids who, when I was growing up, again, if you listen to Advisory Opinions, this is not news. I played Dungeons and Dragons, and I read Lord of the Rings. And one of my earliest ambitions, I had two twin ambitions, Sarah. One, I was going to be a fighter pilot, in Top Gun, and I was going to write the next great fantasy fiction novel. So I have, one of those, which neither one of those happened. But I think through things in narrative terms, and how things would play out in the real world if A, B, C, and D happened. And you look at the world around you, and you think, and you see. So essentially, my case, a key part of my case, is that what makes this time particularly dangerous is that we have not just divisions, but divisions concentrated in geographic clusters of like-minded people, which causes people to get more extreme in their view, and a real sense that each one of these geographic clusters feels that they're under threat, that they're under real cultural threat. This is an original insight to me, but what one of the most interesting things I read in the 2016 run up to the 2016 election said, one reason why our culture war is so hot right now is that both sides think they're losing. And so you feel like you're under threat, you're in a geographically contiguous area. And what's the spark that would catch that on fire is a view that not only is my culture under threat, but maybe our lives are under threat, or our sense of well-being or physical safety is under threat. And you add that condition, and that's all the ingredients that American history has shown for things like the American Revolution, for things like secession in 1861. And here we are, in a situation where, I'm not saying it's happening 3 months from now or 2 months from now. I'm saying that the conditions are being created for it to happen.
I mean, at one point I turned to Scott and I was like, hold on, the governor of Alabama just got assassinated. And Scott was like, excuse me? I was like, no, it's totally believable. What was in the first third where you lay out your case, what was the most surprising thing that you found in writing and researching for the book? Either the statistic or the I don't know, the information that you stumbled across that you were like, oh no.
I think the most surprising thing for me as I was looking into it was um, how long we've known these trends are here. Okay. So, we have such a recency bias where we're like, oh, I just discovered through this incredible think piece written in 2017 that things are heading in a bad situation. And you're like the smartest person in the room because that's a 3-year-old piece that you rediscovered. Right. And one of the key sources in the book is a 2009 book called The Big Sort, which talks about how we have been clustering in these geographic clusters. One of the key elements of understanding our time comes from a 1999 academic paper by Cass Sunstein that like nobody read at the time, but was articulating something that he saw and that the social science had been revealing for a while. And so anytime you're talking about trends that are this big and this important, they're going to have been unfolding for a while. And in fact, people will have been even writing about this aspect or that aspect. And so I think that was one of the things that was surprising to me was how much you could pull on different threads that had existed for a long time and put this whole thing together.
In the last third, so right, you set up the case, all of your, facts, figures, theses in the first third. Middle third is this fictional dystopian novel, which is just so great. And then in the last third, you
try to fix it.
You fix it, do you?
No, try.
You talk about the solution being pluralism, and that the most important part of pluralism, I think you're saying, is tolerance, but that we're defining tolerance wrong. And I thought that was really, there's so many times where I'm reading your writing, and good writing for me is writing where I actually am surprised by the end of the sentence instead of being like nodding along. I'm like, whoa, wait. Right. And I thought, as you discuss tolerance, I found myself surprised by the end of your sentences sometimes. And I loved that chapter because of it. So perhaps you can talk a little bit about what the definition of tolerance is and why that's actually not the definition of tolerance.
Yeah, well, what knocked my socks off about that was something I read from somebody else, a guy who writes under the pseudonym Scott Alexander. And he was talking about how he, as he tells his story, he's working in a blue area of America and he's working with very progressive Americans. I believe he's a psychiatrist. And in conversations, he's confronting people constantly, and he's trying to get people to sort of question a lot of their assumptions. And he asks, "Are you tolerant? Are you tolerant?" And people would say, "Of course I'm tolerant. I have the greatest respect for people of all races. Black Americans, white Americans, gay, straight, trans." And then the next thing he says, "Well, then wait, what's wrong with them? What do you mean what's wrong with them? I mean, there's nothing wrong with them. That's the whole point. I'm tolerant. There's nothing wrong with them." And then his next question is, "Well, then what are you tolerating?" And that's just like this light bulb goes off. And what he was doing is resurrecting the original meaning of the word from regard, which is what it's become. Like if I'm a tolerant person, it means I am holding in high esteem somebody, versus acceptance, which is a different kind of concept. And so
it sort of, to me, it reminded me of, we don't need free speech for the speech you agree with. We have free speech for the speech you don't agree with and that you hate. Yeah. And in that sense, tolerance is not tolerating the people that you like.
There's nothing to tolerate. Yeah. And so what I was talking, part of the book, it's not a kumbaya book. It's not a book that says, here's the solution. We're going to love each other. No. But it does say that we have to.
We're going to hate each other in a less combative way.
Right. Exactly. Hate in a less combative way. I love that. It should be America's Secession Threat and How to Hate in a Less Combative Way. No, I think that's a great phrase. I love that. But that's essentially, what tolerance is. It's saying, yeah, I think there's something wrong with you. but you know what? You have a home in this country, and I'm going to protect the existence of that home in this country. And there's a part of the book where I quote Lin-Manuel Miranda quoting George Washington, quoting the prophet Micah. And this is a phrase that Washington used almost 50 times in his writings. And it's from the book of Micah. And it says, every man shall sit under his own vine and his own fig tree, and no one shall make him afraid. And that sentence was most famous coming out of Washington in a famous letter to the Hebrew congregation of Rhode Island, where he said, he used that to welcome Jewish Americans in this new republic. One of the most persecuted religious minorities in the world was going to have a home in the United States of America. And how did he signal that? With that verse. And he wrote it almost 50 times in his writing, as I said. And that's sort of like the moral frame for pluralism. It's not, every man that I like will sit under his own vine and fig tree, or every man that I agree with. It's every man will sit under his own vine and fig tree, and no one will make him afraid. And when you think of that as a vision of this American constitutional republic, I think it's pretty darn compelling. It's compelling in a way that the word pluralism is not, which sounds super dry. Although I use it 900 times in the book.
So I had thought that one of the benefits of being a conservative who went to two fairly liberal / extremely liberal universities, Northwestern and Harvard Law, was actually better for me because my views were challenged every day. And I thought it was a little unfortunate for my liberal colleagues that they didn't get that education of how to defend their views and how to frankly, get their asses kicked by really smart professors who maybe they were even wrong, but I didn't have the skills to be good enough to argue back. And so I got these workouts, with heavy weights every day, and they were lifting with their little fingers, nothing. And here's my point. I was then reading your book, reflecting on this idea that if you live in one of those geographically isolated red state places, you actually are exposed to liberal culture through network news,
Netflix,
Hollywood, Netflix, etc. I'm not saying that summarizes blue state America, but you're getting some flavor, some spices. But that's not true for blue state America. And so if they don't know a Trump voter, they literally have no way of knowing they exist. It's sort of like believing in leprechauns, except all of a sudden the leprechauns elected your president, and you're like, who the F are these leprechauns?
Exactly.
And I don't know the solution to that.
Well, it's hard. I mean, that's where this gets tough, because you're exactly right. I remember, and again, this is something that's been building for a while. It's sort of begun with a kernel of bubbles that have grown bigger and bigger and bigger. But I remember when I went to the Harvard bubble in 1991, and I continually ran into people who'd never met an evangelical Christian, never met them. I'm thinking, wow, I'm not in Kansas, Kentucky anymore. And so I sort of found myself in this role many times in my life, actually living in Manhattan and Center City, Philly, and Ithaca, New York, where I'm the only conservative in the room. I am the gateway drug to conservatism, and for better or worse. And I don't know how to fix that, to be honest, because this is a product of an awful lot of free choice that builds upon itself. And then that's why I'm saying that solution isn't kumbaya. The solution is, hate each other a little bit less destructively. We're not you have to intentionally. And what I'll say about red America is, we get exposure to blue America, but you have to work to get exposure to the best expression of the opposing point of view. Because what red America has built a little bit of a cocoon around, the conservative media entertainment complex. And it's often learning what it knows about the real ideological underpinnings and philosophical underpinnings of what's going on in blue America from the rebuttals they see on Fox or the caricatures they see on Fox.
Right.
And so you got to go to the Atlantic and like read it, or, you know, and, or go to Vox and read it and to really know what's going on. So it takes effort for both sides, but I totally agree with you that there are entire sections of this country where somebody with my point of view is thin on the ground, and a lot of people just won't encounter it at all. And they will only see it through sort of the quote tweets on Twitter, which is a less than ideal way to be introduced to conservative America.
Less than ideal indeed. All right, let's open this up to questions that are not from me. Thank you,
Okay.
listeners, viewers, for putting in some of your questions. I'm getting a few versions of this, David, and let's be real. This is drag queen story time.
Oh,
Jacob has asked this, Joseph with a version of this, but I'm going to read Jacob's. With all the talk recently of reaching out and making political sacrifices, what is your political red line? Or to phrase in a different way that Joseph phrased it, how do we encourage better cooperation with our political opponents without unilaterally giving up on important issues?
well, my red line is the Bill of Rights. You know, I think the Bill of Rights is the fundamental social compact in the United States of America. That if you're going to say, what is it about this U.S. Constitution that makes America America? It's the Bill of Rights. Now, that doesn't mean there's not room to argue about the full scope of the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth. I think the Third is quite secure, as we've talked about. For me, the centering around the Bill of Rights as sort of this red line of American philosophy, identity, the very definition of classical liberalism. But when it comes to self-governance beyond the Bill of Rights, I'm a big believer in federalism. I'm a big believer in letting California be California and Tennessee be Tennessee. And I had this really great conversation with Ezra Klein in his podcast this week, and you know, we were talking about it, and he's much more for centralization. I'm much more for federalism, because I feel like one of the problems that we have is that my ability to, as the federal government becomes more and more powerful, and if I live in a red state, in a red district of a red state, or if a blue district of a blue state, the most important government in my life, I have no ability to control at all. I'm just a spectator, basically. But if we can compress government down to where the most important government is the one closest to me, I have an ability to do something about that. But you know what that means? It means that I have to be consistent, because right now federalism has become a tactic and not a principle. That's what I say in the book. If you look at Republican and Democratic administrations, when you're out of power, you're like, yay, federalism. When you're in power, your view is like, a loss anywhere is a loss everywhere. And so it becomes really important what California's immigration policies are if you're in Tennessee. Why?
Right.
Why? I mean, if I'm in California, I might have a strong opinion on it, but I guarantee you the California sanctuary, the impact on my life of the California sanctuary state law is microscopic. You can't measure it with an electron microscope. And yet we get this point where any lib winning anywhere is not a sufficient ownership of said lib. And so you get into this position where you can't allow your political opponents an opportunity to breathe, really. And this is part of that increased tension. And I can go back in the Obama administration and the frontal attacks on federalism in the Obama administration. And so we have to get to a point where we're willing to let our political opponents have their vine and fig tree and to sit under it.
All right, I'm seeing a few on this. Jonathan and Matt. Jonathan is the father of a 1-year-old and wants to know how best to raise him to avoid the perils of polarization and political hatred. Matt is a teacher and wants to know how to impart civility and national unity in his students. I think that those are not even two sides of the same coin. They're the same side of the same coin.
Yeah. You know, so I'm a dad of 3 kids. My oldest is 21 and a senior at University of Tennessee. Another is 19, almost 20, a sophomore at University of Tennessee, and a 12-year-old. And man, you know, I think about this all the time. I don't have the perfect answer. The best answer I've been able to come up with is to model the values you seek to advance. And so my kids have grown up, and part of the legacy, and Sarah, I know you're the same way. Part of the legacy of being the only conservative in the room is you end up with progressive friends. you, unless you're just like a complete, introvert / jerk. Those are not the same thing, but introvert plus jerk or whatever. You're going to have friends if you move out of that comfort zone. And so
shout out to my INTJs.
That's right. And so I think that seeking out and modeling the kind of engagement you seek to advance, and that looks like different things for different people. And it's harder in some communities than it is in other communities. But sometimes that can even mean changing communities. These are hard things to figure out, but I think it requires intentional effort with a strategic plan to try to put in place in your life the values that you hold.
Okay, well then I have a dystopian follow-up. So
All right.
Let's say that secession in your version of it happens. Are you going to stay where you are, or would you move?
Man, if the middle chapter, if the Texit scenario happens, those are the kinds of things where you would probably you would probably begin to feel trapped for a couple of reasons. One is, although I do forecast a great migration, but that would be of people who are very much committed to the opposite side team. So if you're a very red person living in California and there was a Cal exit scenario, I could imagine a lot of people who are deep red hightailing it out of there, or vice versa. But I could also imagine a situation of extreme intolerance for people who manifest aspects of the ideology from the opposing team if you went into that if you left. So if somebody like me who's kind of really a fish out of water in a lot of ways, I'm kind of teamless. And I could easily imagine a situation where a person who's pretty teamless wouldn't feel like there was a natural home anywhere. And you just kind of default to like where your parents were,
Well, let me just speak on behalf of all Texans that Texit will always take you and make you feel at home.
The Lone Star State's legendary hospitality that it learned from its mother state of Tennessee.
Ugh. I mean, there were moments in the Texit thing, and I know it was really dark and dystopian, and it's the much darker timeline, if you will.
Yeah, it is.
And for community fans, it's the darkest timeline. But there's moments where you're talking about like the flag and stuff, and I'm like, well.
Yeah. The Texit one is dark. Yeah, it's dark. The Cal exit one is more like opportunistic.
The Cal exit one also felt more realistic, frankly.
It did. I honestly feel like it did as well.
I've got a couple Supreme Court questions for you.
Let's do it.
The most obvious and related to the book, I think, is was the Garland situation a mistake?
The refusal to hold hearings and no committee vote even, yes. Right. I think that was a mistake. The refusal to confirm, I mean, we've got a lot of circumstances in American history where there's been a refusal to confirm, or at least enough to where it's not a significant departure from American precedent. I think that but here's, Sarah, I have a theory. You ready to hear my theory?
Have a theory. I'm open.
Okay, here's my theory. My theory is that the reason why we did not have hearings is not because hearings would have been futile, but because Mitch McConnell was worried that hearings would not have been futile.
Oh, no, exactly. Name the lobster. Like, that's the last thing you want people to do. We're going to kill the lobster, so you can't name the lobster.
Are we having Bob for dinner? Yeah. And so Mitch McConnell didn't have confidence that his caucus wouldn't crack, because there would have been under intense pressure. So he did what he did. He sort of put his body in front of his caucus, absorbed all of the slings and arrows, but then set a really pretty extreme precedent there that we're just not even going to consider. And then a lot of his sort of flock departed from his reasoning. So he was, in a very...
Can you imagine being Mitch McConnell and you're like, shut up, shut up, shut up.
Oh,
Don't say that. Shut up.
Yeah, exactly. Don't get all high-minded with me here.
That's pretty good.
Thank you. And I mean, I grew up in Kentucky. I've heard Mitch for years, but so a bunch of his flock sort of says, no, there's a grander principle at stake. It's not that we disagree with his philosophy and that we think that we're going to reject him because of his judicial philosophy, and also because we think we can win in 2020, which is entirely reasonable thing to say. Instead, they said, there are 80 years of precedent that we do not do this. I would not even do this if a Republican was in the White House, and made these sweeping norm-based moral pronouncements rooted in democracy and respect for the will of the people. And I can only imagine Mitch going, that's going to bite you. And
I mean, what were the chances though? Leave it to 2020, right? What were the chances?
Yeah. Oh, and especially that it was
exact scenario.
Oh, except that it happened during the election, like during it. People are voting right now, y'all.
Yeah. So a couple questions on, this is Heidi's question, which I've actually seen a few versions on Twitter. And Heidi, if it was just you on Twitter, good job, because you fooled me into thinking that more people have this question than actually do. If the Supreme Court is supposed to stay out of politics, is it appropriate for a justice to be a pop culture icon?
Is it appropriate? I think that it is inevitable, given their power, that some of them will be on occasion. If let me put it this way, if conservatives controlled the high ground of American culture, Antonin Scalia would have been a rock star.
Do you have any of the bobbleheads? I don't have any up here. The Scalia bobblehead where he has the lemon.
Oh, yeah. I don't have one, but I know about him.
Yeah.
And look, Amy Coney Barrett is on her way. Yeah, she is on her way. And when you have a court that is that powerful, and some of the personalities are going to be more distinct, and some of the biographies are going to be more distinct than the others, it's going to happen. It's just absolutely going to happen. And then especially as a person is perceived to be increasingly indispensable.
Right.
Yeah.
Related to that is Jenny's question. It feels like the fight over RBGC is going to do damage to how the public perceives the institution of the Supreme Court. Agreed. Mm-hmm. Do the two of you think there is anything the sitting justices can do to depoliticize a fast appointment? And do you think they would be likely to try to take steps to cool things down? I have thoughts. I bet you do too.
Oh, you remember our podcast guest, Josh Blackman?
Yep.
Did you see his post today at Reason?
No.
This one blew my... So here's the thing that gets me, y'all. Let me just do a short rant. Very short. We constantly go into these nomination battles as if these people are not human beings, not just in the sense that we dehumanize them to insult them and to try to destroy their reputation to defeat them, which is a problem. We dehumanize them in the idea that what we're doing is putting on in the court a conservative or a progressive automaton, sort of like a voting machine. Yes, no, yes, no. When you're putting a human being there who has their own independent will and their own independent judgment, and guess what? Over time, they often kind of change and evolve and all of that. Here was what Josh Blackman said. What if Justice Roberts does the resign in time to save 9?
Whoa.
I told you. He was like, I'm kind of tongue in cheek, but there's a logic to it. So
Joe Biden wins.
Joe Biden wins.
And John Roberts resigns so that not only does Joe Biden get the seat back that was taken from them, whether you think it was Garland or this one, but
right.
One was taken in theory. and they get the Chief Justice seat. So you get the seat back and you get a little bonus, gratuity.
Yeah. And so Josh's idea was Chief Justice Kagan. Now, again, this was all tongue-in-cheek, hypothetical, but it had a very, it was a refreshing reminder that that human beings are not as predictable as we may presume. And we put an awful lot of emotional energy into the contrary belief, which is the false belief that we can indeed understand what is going to happen from the actions that we take now, when we often cannot understand that. And so, yeah, that was something that he said that I thought, yeah, the future is a branching tree of possibilities. It is not set by these actions.
David French, chaos theory from Jurassic Park.
Yes.
I think also in the very short term, although that you have blown my mind, very short term, these election challenges that you're seeing, the emergency petitions from Pennsylvania, for instance, they will not be 4-4. And that's not because the court and those four people and those four people wouldn't have been on opposing sides if it could have been a 5-4 vote, but you are not going to see those 8 people let that happen right now.
No.
And I think that's one thing that they'll do. And I think they'll actually work very hard so that it's not 5-3 either.
I think you're right about that. I also think one of the big wild cards is if Trump keeps saying that he needs the 9th to guarantee that he's going to have a favorable outcome if the election is contested. I mean,
yeah, I saw that today.
Yeah. So
to lower the temperature.
Yeah, so that you just take it already fraught decision and you take it to an even higher degree of temperature. And look, we have right now, McConnell has the votes. He has the votes, but he also shepherding 50 human beings who have not yet begun to be put under pressure. And if Trump continues to say things like that, can I imagine a Mitt Romney saying, well, I was going to vote, but now he's cast into question the very legitimacy of the court. So now I'm going to I have no choice but to wait for the election. I mean, it's unlikely. I think Mitt has said what he's said and he's standing on principle on that. And I think he'll stay with it, but it's not, and especially if he keeps saying that and Trump's standing or the polling starts to turn really negative. There's things that can happen.
Questions on other temperature lowering ideas. So what do you think of mandatory retirement age for federal judges? And I'm going to add in, what do you think about, so there's the version of the court packing idea where you expand it to 17 judges, let's say, with 17-year terms that would rotate out every 2 years, basically, by the time you can go read about this, but like you'd start it and then eventually after 17 years, you would get to the rotating terms, whatever. You don't need 17 judges to do that. So they could also have a mandatory retirement age and term limits on SCOTUS, so to speak, where it is 9 justices, but that every president would be guaranteed 2 appointments.
Yeah, I am, I'm a Burkean conservative in that, like, if you're going to tell me change this longstanding institution, you're going to have to batter through a wall for me before I'm going to be saying, okay.
It's better than court packing, though. That's a wall.
Yeah, but I have that wall has basically been battered through for me. And I think one of the final straws is, for me, I began to realize, wait a minute, we're becoming so obsessed with taking control of these court seats for a generation or more that we're now imposing a sort of a de facto age limit on our nominees. So the nominees have to have sort of a very specific kind of profile. It's the federal judge career track profile, and they can't be too old. And because the goal is, if I'm going to nominate somebody, it's a waste unless they can be there for 20 years at least. And again, this creates a situation where we have this sense of helplessness. My vote for president doesn't matter. My vote for Congress doesn't matter. And oh, by the way, that judicial nominee that I didn't want in from the president I didn't want, oh, he or she's going to be there for 35 years. It just creates this incredible sort of sense of hopelessness and incredible angst and anger in the moment of the nomination. And so I think that is somewhat destabilizing. It's not the main thing that's destabilizing, but it is a thing. And I think it's a thing that I like your idea that every president's going to get a couple of picks. And you can predict it, and you can know, and you can vote accordingly.
And it will be far less destabilizing than adding seats to the Supreme Court, which will create a tit for tat where we now have a 435 person Supreme Court.
Yeah, exactly. A Supreme Court as big as the House.
That's right. And it's functional, by the way.
And could you imagine oral argument to the 435 member Supreme Court?
So we got a question from someone who did not give their name. So
anonymous.
Secret, here's your question. But I am picking it because I want to go on a little bitty rant about it. So Trump just said he won't commit to a peaceful transfer of power should he lose. If so, how do you see that playing out? Here's what I have to say about this. So I had lunch with a friend today, David, and that friend is gay, and she's married to a Mexican immigrant who is a green card holder right now. And they were really scared this weekend after RBG died, like really upset in a way that it's easy for me to say like, why are you upset?
Right.
But when it's your friend, you're trying to listen to them and assuage their fears. And I think what's important for, when I talk to high school students, for instance, or something, we are going to spend $2 billion in this country over the course of this election cycle, scaring the crap out of each other, because that's how vote turnout works. And that's how political consultants get paid, and politicians win elections. And there's no regard for the fact that people are taking it seriously. It's not a game to them. It's not about turning out the vote. Like, these people are fearing for their family and their lives, and they think Obergefell is going to be overturned, and that all Mexicans who are here legally with green cards are going to be kicked out of the country, because that's what they're being told, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. I know that doesn't sound related to what Trump said today, but it kind of is, because reporters keep asking Trump every now and then questions that are hypotheticals that are meant to have him basically say something enraging, and then they get a headline that's enraging. Yeah. So they asked him, would you commit to a peaceful transfer of power? First of all, like, wild hypothetical in the future. It's not actually like a factual question in any real sense. You're just like asking for his, whatever. So he doesn't commit to it. Instead, he says, well, we'll see, because he also is part of this culture of attention and headlines and fear and outrage machine. And so both sides got what they wanted. And now the headlines tonight are all about how he won't commit to a peaceful transfer of power.
And a lot of real people have, as you noted, a whole lot more fear and a whole lot more angst and a whole lot more concern. Because they don't know it's a game. Right. And what ends up happening is, because a lot of them don't know it's a game, that might result in not having an entirely peaceful transition period. But you're exactly right. It's sort of like, here's the gotcha, Mr. President. And the president, rather than saying, I know what you're doing, that's bait. I'm referring to the scene from Mad Max Fury Road. That's bait. He's like Leroy Jenkins. I mean, I'm going to go in and I'm just going to take that. And you want me to say something inflammatory? Well, brother, get a load of this. And yeah, you're exactly right. Now, to calm people down a little bit, hopefully, when he says he won't commit to a peaceful transfer of power, he can't stay in the Oval Office. I mean, don't worry about that, America, because the very instant that the next president takes the oath of office, whether it's 2021 or 2025, Donald Trump is a trespasser in the White House. And there he is immediately stripped of all constitutional authority. I would have as much right to be in there as he does, and I have no right to be in there. And so the transfer of power is going to occur. And there is not going to be some sort of rebellion in the armed forces or Secret Service to keep him there, some sort of like organized armed effort to keep him. That no. Can I guarantee you that some of the Proud Boys or the Boogaloo Boys or, you know, whatever some of these militias will go by that time won't do something? No, I can't. You can't guarantee that. Does it make it more possible if he's stoking and stoking and stoking? Yeah, it makes it more possible that some of them will do something dangerous. But the bottom line is this country will not tolerate a president who tries to squat on the Resolute desk.
All right. A couple questions about your interview with Ezra Klein, which I did not listen to. Sorry.
No, that's fine. It was long. It's like an hour and a half.
Yeah. So I'm gonna have to depend on Kevin and David here from the question section here. From your conversation with Ezra Klein, what was the best point he made that you disagreed with? And similarly, David's question, out of the arguments that Ezra Klein made, which were the most persuasive, persuasive, best, but one that you disagreed with?
Okay, so we went round and round about the filibuster. Was something that we disagreed on, and it was it might have
pro the filibuster.
I'm pro filibuster. He's anti filibuster.
Okay.
And we went round and round on that. And in my scenarios, actually, both scenarios have a filibuster override in a highly, the nuclear option on the filibuster in the middle of incredibly contentious times to ram through legislation that's deeply inflammatory towards the other half of the country. And his position was, because the filibuster happens, legislators don't have to legislate anymore. And there's a point there. He's got a point there that essentially what happens is because we're closely divided enough and the legislators have no hope in overriding the senators have no hope in overriding a filibuster, both House and Senate therefore sort of get to LARP through their jobs, this live action role play. And I think that's a fair point. I really do.
The most boring LARP ever.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I think that's a fair point. It really is. But I also know that when there has been a big legislative push over the united opposition of the other side, even with a filibuster-proof majority, which was Obamacare, which for a very brief moment, Obama had that 60-40, that magical 60-40. The overwhelming of a united opposition created a much higher amount of polarization in this country. It ratcheted up the tensions in this country. It's the first major piece of social legislation passed without a single Republican vote. Now, all my Democratic friends who are dispatch members are saying, that's because of Mitch McConnell's intransigence. Yeah, I get it. But Mitch was working with clay that was ready to be worked. And I think that what we have is a situation where why we need to have more federalism and less centralization is that kind of healthcare reform can happen in the communities that really, really want it and not in the communities that don't want it. And that lowers the temperature while still giving, millions upon millions of progressive Americans the ability to live in the kind of polity that they want to create. And it's right out there. It's hanging right out there. One of the things that makes us divided is also one of the keys to effective local governance. And that is 80% of Americans live under one party state rule. Almost 80%, about 78%, where there is the same party controls the House, the Senate, or the lower house, the upper house, and the governor's mansion. And so the ability to get stuff done is there. The power to get stuff done is often missing. And that's why one of the reasons why I propose a devolution of power. And one other quick thing that he said that I thought I had to say, fair, because I had this, I love my the rise of the Bill of Rights Republican. Like I want the Bill of Rights Republican to rise. And he said, well, if we center around the Bill of Rights, won't that just mean that we will then start to enhance disagreements over what the Bill of Rights encompasses? Like, yeah, but it'll still be better.
All right. I'm having a lot of fun, so we're going to run a little over here, David. That all right with you?
That's fine.
All right. I've just got a couple more questions. We had some really good member questions, so I've got to get through some of these. This, I should have put earlier because I've been thinking about it since we got it. From SG, whoever you are.
The Solicitor General.
The Solicitor General, yeah. So it's
yes, Mr. Solicitor
it's
General.
Jeff
Thank you
Wall.
for joining.
Thanks, Jeff, for watching. Acting Solicitor General. Ever since I first heard David talk about the book and its premise, I've been inclined to turn the question around. Should the United States of America remain as one nation united, or should we consider breaking apart? And he sort of goes on to struggle with that and says, is this even a dangerous thing to talk about? And what do you guys think about it? And honestly, reading the, page 119, like at the end of it, I had the same question of, should this be something that we're dreading as the worst case scenario no matter what? Or should it be something that we accept as one possibility and that we can work toward in an amicable way?
Yeah, a little known fact about the origin of the book. When I was talking to the publisher about it, he said, "Could you make the case that it could be desirable?"
Yeah.
And
your
I said,
exit strategy is maybe closer to that. I would say that your foreign policy chapter and what's going on in the world is actually not the darkest timeline, because that's definitely the Texit one, but it's it's not good
reality
if you
check.
care about any other part of the world.
Yeah. So I actually did that thought exercise. I thought through it, and I gave it because we were sort of hashing it out. When you have a really good editor, that's one of the things you do is you just sort of hash through, and he'll say, that's not convincing, or this, have you thought about this? So I really went down that rabbit hole in my mind, and I just couldn't get there for a couple of reasons, one principled and one pragmatic. The principal reason is I really believe that the aspirational principles in the Declaration of Independence and the operationalization of those principles in the Bill of Rights and the Civil War amendments represent the best shot that human beings have given at a truly just society. We're imperfect. We screw up all the time. But these principles articulated in the Declaration of Independence and protected in the Bill of Rights, these are principles of human rights and human flourishing that I think that are rooted in eternal truth. And so a nation dedicated to those principles is a nation worth preserving, in my view. It just is a matter of principle, because the fact of the matter is, when you have secession type scenarios, in reality, what spins out of it, it wasn't a guarantee that the American Revolution was going to yield what it yielded. There was a lot of internal battles within the colonists over what kind of culture they were going to create. So this was not guaranteed. And so saying, well, what we'll create out of this is something like Declaration of Independence 2.0. It could be something worse. And so as a matter of principle, I think this is worth preserving. And then the pragmatic part of it, that chapter that imagines the world after the breakup of the United States of America, that thing, I wrote it and I thought, I'm actually going to dial down the dystopianism a little bit in it, because people won't believe it, but I actually believe it'd be worse than I wrote. And that we have, through the power of the United States, which is, we have a military power and an economic power combined that we've taken for granted, that all of these sort of great power conflicts and the clash of interests at great powers, we have kept suppressed. And if you lift the lid on that, heaven help us. And that means warfare. That means economic hardship. That means a lot of negative consequences that would impact countless millions of lives.
Okay, what is the one thing you changed your mind about while writing the book? Asked Colin.
That's a good question.
Or maybe it was this, that there was no good secession strategy.
Well, yeah. I mean, I didn't really have one in my mind to begin, but I did kind of, go down that. How about this? How about if I say a change of mind helped me start the book? Okay. Because the change of mind that helped me start the book is I have become steadily less partisan. Ever since I got back from Iraq in 2008. So I've been evolving into a less partisan human being. And I lay that out in chapter 1. ever since I got back from Iraq. And then the other big change in mind is, quite frankly, and I'm going to speak a little quieter because my daughter's in the other room, is the experience of experiencing the very real racism that exists in this country, and the ramification, and opening my eyes to the legacies of that racism, meaning that I began to credit a heck of a lot more of my opponent's critiques of the, some of the laws and structures of American society. And so that combination of less partisanship combined with more awareness of things like police injustice and police brutality and the systemic effects of racism. Notice I didn't use the hot potato word systemic racism. The systemic effects of racism put me in a very different frame of mind as I started this book.
By the way, David, while we've been talking, 2 Louisville police officers have been shot, and we don't know their condition. So just as we wrap here, and I'm going to move to the fun questions, I do just want to say that our thoughts and prayers are with their families, and how sad that is happening in our country.
Yes.
But David, I do want to move to fun questions with you.
Okay.
What is your writing process? Asks Ray. Does he write in the morning, at night, with or without coffee?
That's a great question. The answer is I write before my deadline. So if my deadline is by noon, I'm writing in the morning. If my deadline is in the late afternoon, I'm writing in the afternoon.
So it's basically college, still college.
It's college, it's law school. It's like, I'm just built like that. I
always compare it to gas from like high school. A gas will expand to the space it's allotted. That's writing.
Yes. I mean, that was my legal life. I could have a slow period in my litigation career, and I would have, say, 40 days before a brief is due. And I would look at it not like, great, I can get started on that brief early. It's like, hey, let me take a couple days off.
Do you, are you a Diet Coke? Are you a coffee? What's your vice?
Morning coffee, afternoon, like soft drinks or something like that. And evenings, I will sometimes, on occasion, Sarah, edit a document. Never draft a document, but edit a document with a glass of bourbon in my hands. Never draft and drink, but I submit you can edit and drink.
Interesting. I don't drink caffeine.
Really?
I'm not even sure you know that about me. I don't drink coffee.
I did not know that.
Sodas, yeah. Isn't that weird?
Huh. If you remove coffee from my diet, there would be, or caffeine, there would be immediate negative consequences.
I just have a natural buzz. What can I say? Okay. By the way, thank you, Mary from Texas. She said that her 18-month-old grandson just popped in and said, Sarah. Which brings me more joy than you can possibly understand, Mary, because my 3.5-month-old son basically sees me and looks away immediately. So at least somebody's kid likes me. Okay, David, most important question comes in from Casey. It'll be our last question of the night. How is it that your parents would not let you watch Cheers, but were fine with you playing Dungeons and Dragons?
That is a very good question. That was part of the answer to that question is the result of early lawyering on my part. So there was some skepticism expressed towards Dungeons and Dragons, which I responded with, why would you be opposed to me doing something like playing a game version of Lion Witch in the Wardrobe?
You convinced them that Dungeons and Dragons was Lion Witch in the Wardrobe?
With an inflection of Lord of the Rings as well. Yeah. But no, they didn't buy into all of the demonic influences.
The Harry Potter is evil thing.
No. They had heard some things and just asked some questions, some probing questions. But the Cheers, you know, there was nothing subtle about Cheers, whereas the argument about Dungeons and Dragons was that there was some mystical spiritual forces that would be unleashed through it, which they were very skeptical of that argument. But the idea that the Sam and Diane relationship was not perfect fodder for preteen eyes was.
So I was allowed to watch Cheers. I remember watching Cheers, but of course I would have been very, very young. But like my mom or dad would laugh at a joke that was clearly of one of those natures, David. And I would laugh because they're laughing. So like we're supposed to laugh. And my mother, and this is like such a like great childhood memory. My mother always would look at me and go, "You don't know why that's funny." Because as soon as I was going to know I was funny, I couldn't watch it anymore.
Yeah. My dad would laugh. And then after the show is over and he'd laughed and laughed and laughed, he'd say, "Yeah, we're never watching that again."
Well, David, really, the book is so fantastic. And it is such a treat to have you as my quarantine bestie.
Oh, well, thank you, Sarah. I really do appreciate it. And I appreciate all of y'all who tuned in. We're about to run out of, I just got some of the reports that we're about to run out of the signature cards or book plates that I've gotten. So we're going to have to order more. So you can, I'll still sign. If you've not ordered yet, please go ahead and do it. And I'll still sign. And I really appreciate the support of this community, the feedback of this community. I've been super, super busy. And one thing I regret is that I haven't been able to wade into the comment section as much as I normally do. But I'll do that. And oh, wait a minute. My dog, Boo, is making his presence felt there in the background. But I really appreciate this community. And Sarah, it's such a treat to do our podcast. And you're just super kind to do this Dispatch Live tonight. And I really appreciate it.
Our first of many advisory opinion Dispatch Lives, I hope.
I hope so too. This is fun.
This is really fun. Steve's in the comments, so we'll see. Like, God only knows what he's typing right now. Thank you so much for being a member of this community, for joining us tonight. Really, this is the best. Like, just the Dispatch family. It's so much fun to hang out with you guys in the comments section, in the question section here, all of it. We love it. We'll do it again soon. We will see you after the debate. Will be our next live. Don't forget, that's Tuesday. So right after the debate, we're going to hop on here with Jonah and Steve and David and I and chit chat about what we thought. Or SMOD will happen before then, in which case we're all relieved of that duty.
One can only hope.
So until then, thank you. And we'll have another advisory opinions for you tomorrow. Have a great night.
Good night, everybody.